So because I'm sharing my screen, I can't see who's coming in. I can't see if we've kind of stopped having people jump in. So just if somebody could let me know when it's a good time to jump in.
Sure, we've got 19 now. I'll let you know 20. I'll check in a minute. It looks like there's, yeah. Hey, Karina, it looks like things are leveling off a little bit, so I think we can get started.
Great. Well, everyone, welcome and thank you for joining our Electrification Checklist webinar. We're now well over a year into doing the checklist, maybe even a couple of years now. And so the purpose here is to introduce updates to the checklist that we have made and are rolling out on April 1st, and also to get your feedback on it. I know we sent it out hopefully to all of you last week sometime. So if you've had a chance to look at that, or as questions come up, we'd really love to hear from you if you have some input. There we go. So Zoom, don't feel like you need to use your video camera. There is the chat feature available, so please use that to interact with specific people, specific participants, or with the panelists, and use the Q&A function or raise your hand if you have a question or comment. We are going to break up the presentation today in sections. So at the end of each technology, we'll pause and ask for any inputs. But do feel free to use chat and Q&A throughout. And here's where you go. If you look in, it's either in the bottom of the screen, or I think sometimes it could be elsewhere depending on your device. But there is a chat button with a little speech bubble, Q&A with the 2 speech bubbles, and a button to raise your hand. I think Zoom may have rolled out some additional things. So if you want to clap or smile or anything like that, you're welcome to show your emotions using those tools as well. So we're going to first go over the checklist itself and then go through each of the technologies. And like I said, have a break at the end of each one. And then hopefully we'll have some time for any overall comments, questions, concerns, feedback that you may have. Emily, do you want to go over the kind of background now, introduction, before I jump into the checklist?
Sure. So yeah, just quickly, hi everyone, Emily Alvarez from Stop Waste. I'm the program lead for BayREN's green labeling program, which includes Home Energy Score. I am just so excited about this checklist still, and just can't thank you all enough for making the success that it has been. Since this launched in August of 2020, we are over, I think, 5,000 or so checklists now, and getting them in for over 80% of our home energy scores. And I will say that when we started this, I was not expecting that so many of you would pick this up and really get going with it in the way that you have. You're an amazing workforce to be in partnership with. And I just can't thank you all enough for just making the program and this pilot such a success. We did analyze the first year and change of data that came in through these checklists from August 2020 to January 31st of 2021. And that report is now published and out there in the world. I'll drop a link to it in the chat, but just again, thank you for using it. Thank you for making it successful. And I'm excited about this next phase of it, and being able to improve upon it and learn some lessons from, on how to make it better. So that's all. Back over to you, Frontier team.
Right. And that actually reminds me some housekeeping I forgot to mention. We will be sending everybody a copy of the slides, and as well as the link that Emily just mentioned. And we are recording this webinar, and it will be available for you, some of your colleagues who were not able to attend, to view at your leisure. So don't feel like you have to go crazy taking notes. All right, so hopefully you've all heard the term electrification before. We're using it here to mean fuel substitution, fuel switching, gas to electric, essentially changing the fuel that goes in, that powers your home, to electricity. And this comes along with the state goals. We're really one of the reasons of doing this checklist is to help move towards those goals. We've designed it so that it's just collecting additional data points in addition to the home energy score assessment. So there are some data points that you are already collecting to complete the assessment. And so we've tried to be cognitive of that and really only gather just a few extra things. One thing of note that this year, the incentive has dropped to $50 per home, except for Berkeley and Palo Alto, where the homes are not eligible for incentives. So we are hoping that by using this tool, and sure, we'd love to hear from you about how this has worked for you, what it has helped. But we're hoping that it can help you promote the electric recommendations, give you the knowledge and give you the confidence to be able to recommend them, and also recognize some potential barriers in the home to electrification. And I know you may not be able to say, yes, for sure, you can install this, but it'll give you a pretty good idea of whether it will be feasible. And it's really hoping to be a channel for you to spur conversation and promote you as a resource to the homeowners on electrification. And on the right here, you can see where this comes out on the label itself. Some of these electrification recommendations come out right on the label. All right, so we'll dive right into the first technology, which is space heating and cooling. As you can see here, we've got a heat pump, a ducted air source heat pump with the outdoor unit on the outside and the indoor unit on the inside. So the checklist here is asking about the distribution of the heating and cooling throughout the home, ultimately. The technologies that you see here, it's the same list in the home energy score, but it's broken up by what the distribution system is, because really what you will be recommending, it depends on what the existing distribution is, whether you can use that and make an easy switch. For example, from a ducted system with ducted heating and cooling to switch right in with the type of air source heat pump that was shown on the previous page. So if there is, say, no space heating, then or no space cooling, then obviously you don't need to answer the question about whether they're both on the same centralized ducting. But if there is, it's really helpful to know if they are, because then that will help you know whether you want to recommend a ducted system or a ductless heat pump. We also have the questions about space heating or cooling, because, you know, like all equipment has a life. We don't want to be recommending them if they just bought a new heating system that might be highly efficient already. And we are looking at distribution because heat pumps by nature, they have both heating and cooling through the same appliance. So it matters to know how, when we switch out with a heat pump, how that might work. If a home has, I mentioned the ducting, if a home has window air conditioners and maybe they do have ducting for heating, you can still use the ducted forced air source heat pumps and do away with the window air conditioners. If you have homes that have direct cooling to rooms, like the window air conditioners or wall conditioners, and heating that might be resistance heating or hot water through a boiler or something like that, then ductless heat pumps are a suitable recommendation. Other things to look at when you're looking at heat pumps, and we'll get to this a little bit later when we look at the electrical panels. Heat pumps will typically require 2 or 4 spaces free. They are two-phase appliances. Sometimes the indoor appliances will be powered through the outdoor appliance, so only 2 spaces will need to be free. Sometimes they're separate. And typically you'll need at least 60 amps free for that. And for the outdoor unit, ideally, they do make a little bit of noise, so ideally there's some space outside that's away from bedrooms or neighbors. Those of us that have neighbors that had an outdoor unit next to a bedroom, you'll know what I'm talking about. Yeah, there are rebates for heat pump HVAC. Those we'll have detailed in a little bit more. But before I get to that, how do you know if a heat pump should be recommended? Well, first up, if there have been envelope improvements, so the house is pretty tight, then the house is really already set up for a heat pump. It's not necessary, but it's a really good idea. And if the main panel has space for more breakers and the capacity to add load, that's going to be a really good candidate. For a heat pump to be a great candidate, either the house has an existing cooling load or the homeowner has no cooling load but wants to add AC. I mentioned the room outside of the home for the outdoor unit and the space in the panel. Now Tiari is going to go over the rebates and incentives that are available to the homeowners.
Yes, hi everyone. So yes, there are rebates and incentives for heat pump HVAC, and particularly through the BayREN as well as the tech programs. And for those of you who are not familiar, the BayREN standing for Bay Area Regional Energy Network, that consists of the local governments in the 9 counties in the Bay Area. They offer significant amount of rebates of various technologies. Here, as you can see on the left side, $1,000 rebate to start with for replacing with a heat pump HVAC, and additional rebates, as you can see on the list here. And the tech, which is actually a recently launched statewide program, it's the Tech Clean California Initiative, and that just recently launched in December this past year, that offer incentives, particularly for heat pump for both HVAC as well as a heat pump water heater. They both have different requirements, both the BayREN versus the tech rebates and incentives. But the nice thing about the tech program, you can actually stack the rebates, at which case, as you can see, $3,000 for a package split, mini split, or multi-split unit, plus an additional $1,000. So that would be up to $4,000 to start with. In as much as with all the additional rebates, close to about $5,000 of rebates to make that change. And for more details and information, the website is there, and you can check that out for more on that. And we'll introduce more of the other rebates along the way in this presentation.
Terry, if I can just clarify.
Yeah.
So the BayREN rebates are, so these rebate programs are new and we're all still figuring out how they work. Even the contractor I'm working with right now to do my heat pump project still sometimes asks me some questions. So feel free if you have questions about this to contact us or one of the BayREN energy advisors. But I will say, so the BayREN rebates for heat pump HVAC are still limited. So there's the $1,000 available if you have a wall heater with or without an added AC load, or if you have both a heating and cooling load in the same house. BayREN's rebate is not available if you have a central furnace, for example, but no cooling load, so no AC. We're hoping that that will change, but that's why we're so thankful that the tech rebates launched, because they are available no matter the configuration of heating and cooling, whether there is cooling, et cetera. So pretty much every home in the Bay Area should qualify for the tech rebates. Not every home will qualify for the BayREN rebates. And like I said, that's something that we can help you out with, or the energy advisor can help you out with. That doesn't necessarily affect your recommendations, although of course the rebates available can influence what recommendations you decide to make. But that's something that, you know, if the person goes through the Home Plus program, that will be clarified for them. And then the other thing about the stacking is that they do stack, but in a very odd way, where it actually is still just a $3,000 rebate. It just becomes an interesting situation where, in this case, $1,000 would come from BayREN if the project qualifies for a BayREN rebate, and then $2,000 would come from the state program to still equal a total of $3,000. So it's more about stacking where the money is coming from on the back end, but I wish it made it a $4,000 rebate, but sadly that's not the case. Although those bonus rebates are still stacked on top. So again, this is a new program. And so a lot of our Home Plus contractors still have questions about it. I'm sure some of you are both Home Plus contractors and home energy score assessors. You've been through some of these tech webinars, but we wanted to let you all know that there is this great new state rebate program called the tech program available.
Excellent, thank you.
So I think that's the last one on heat pumps and HVAC assessments. So I'd like to open up the floor here for any questions or comments or anything you need clarification on. And since I'm sharing my screen, if somebody else could let me know if any questions come in chat, please.
The CAS testing rebate is available to any Home Plus project, so not just electrification ones. So if they are going through a gas upgrade, they can qualify for that bonus incentive as well. That's the only question I see right now, Karina.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. We've been told by tech specifically, you qualify for a total of 4,000. Great. It's my, yeah, I feel like we've been told the opposite, but maybe I can chat our Home Plus expert now and figure out if there's some clarification for that. Because I certainly, like I said, hope that's true, especially as someone who's going through a heat pump upgrade myself right now.
All right, if nothing else comes in, feel free to ask questions on previous topics if something comes up throughout. But I'll keep on going, and we'll take another break at the end of the next section.
Karina and Emily, this is Nancy Barba. I can perhaps help, but Frontier also supports the tech program. Help with this question around tech.
Please do.
Okay, so it really is a dependent on zip code. So there is a qualifying zip code list, and so it's not a blanket. Everyone qualifies up to 4,000, and I will drop in a link to the zip codes and that zip code finder spreadsheet. By taking a look at it and looking at the zip code that you're looking to be able to provide your customer the incentive, you will be able to find kind of the cap on that incentive. So I'll drop that in.
That's extremely helpful. Thank you, Nancy. Any more questions at this point? I'll take silence as it's time to move on. All right, now onto the electrical panel. And this is one that I know it's not always the easiest. It's complex, and we're not asking you to get in the way of the authorities having jurisdiction or registered electricians. It's really a very quick look to kind of give a ballpark of, is this even gonna work at all? So here's the checklist here, and it looks complicated. Really, it's not. Bear with me. The first question that you really need to look at is it a circuit breaker or is it a fuse box? If it's a fuse box, check the box, stop. There's no need to do anything else, because really, if they are going to go in and put a house to full electrification, they're going to have to replace that. You'll probably find it in older houses. The reason that they really need to be replaced is, one, panels, electricals in a home, they have a lifetime, and if they are fuses, their lifetime is likely past, and it does start to become a safety issue. So if you come across this, say to the homeowner, look, I'm not really able to make any full recommendations, but you should get your panel looked at. And if you really want to add a lot of load, want to electrify things, you're going to have that looked at first. There's a good chance too that the wiring is going to be also, like, the whole thing might need to be replaced. So I don't want you to mess with that. But if it is a circuit breaker, if you have the switches on the left that will change position if the circuit's overloaded, then check the box and move on. The next is to look at the amperage of the main panel. The most common range is between 60 and 200 amps. A lot of houses, they'll either be 100 amps or 200 amps. But for larger homes that do have a higher load for whatever reason, you may see up to 400 amps. That's not out of the realm of possibility. If it's less than 150 amps, or 150 or below, you're likely going to need a panel and wiring upgrade first. So really, you want to know if it's 200 amps or more. If it's 200 amps, it's probably going to be okay to add some electrification measures. And how to determine it? Well, there's a main breaker switch within the panel. On the top right here shows some different locations you might find it. It's usually there are 2 rows of breakers, and the main panel goes across 2. That's so that it can make sure that if it is needed to be turned off, or if it is switched from overcurrent, then it's going to turn off both of those rows. The panel itself may have a higher rating. So you might see different numbers inside the panel door. Now that rates the panel itself, but ultimately the number that is shown on this switch, if that is what is restricting current to the panel. And so don't worry about any other number that you see except for the number that's on this switch. And like I said, typically it'll be 100 or 200, almost always. Now next is their capacity to support load. So there are ways to estimate this. An electrician will go in and there are ways to do more accurate calculations. For example, depending on which are motor loads, which are resistance loads, how frequent they're used, which ones are concurrent. But for the purposes of this, to get a very, very rough estimate of what the house's load is, just add up the numbers in the breaker and then multiply by 80%. One thing I will note here, so there's 2 double pole breakers at the top, a 30 amp and a 40 amp. You don't add those 2 numbers because the 30 amp, for example, is 15 amps on each leg. So all you need to do here is say, well, the panel capacity amperage is significantly greater than the load. So yeah, we can go ahead. It's likely okay. I will note that, like, if you're switching out, for example, resistance heat with heat pumps, well, you're going to lose some resistant heat load and free up some breakers for heat pumps. So it's not exact by all means, but it is a very quick estimate that's going to work for our purposes here. The next thing that's important is how many blank spaces are there. The one on the left, there's 1 space. A lot of these electrification measures need at least 2 spaces free because they run on double phase. So on the left, probably not. That's not to say that they can't have a sub-panel installed. And many companies that do install equipment, electrification equipment, will have an electrician on staff that will do that. It just means it's a little bit of extra work that needs to be done, and probably more review of the whole situation of the home's electrical system. The one in the middle, we've got, I don't know, what is that, 8 spaces free? They're likely fine. I will notice, if you look on the bottom right, this one had a couple of switches that were off. So there's a chance sometimes that there was something there before, it's been removed, the breaker hasn't been removed, but it's been switched off. So there's a good chance too that that could be an open breaker space. Again, not an exact science. It's a little bit of judgment, but basically if there's at least 2 free, something can be done. And it also depends on the homeowner too, right? Like how many measures do they want to go ahead with? Another example here, we have some larger appliances, the 30 and 40. This is the same picture we showed before. So the dryer has a double pole breaker, the range has a double pole breaker, the rest are all single range. It's likely that the range is resistance electric, and it's likely that the dryer is electric, but not heat pump. There are lots of spaces here. So I would say this house has capacity depending on what the main panel breaker size is. A lot of houses will also have sub panels, and these you may see these labeled and coming from the main panel, you may not. You may have a disconnect next to them. So it's a little bit harder to follow and find if they exist, find what the amperage are. But the same things that I mentioned earlier apply. A lot of times, for example, when solar PV is added, a lot of these companies will add a separate panel for those. So you actually don't necessarily need a new breaker to accommodate the new equipment. There are some older panels, some specific ones that we know that are a hazard. They're not particularly safe. So in this case, if you see these kinds, ones that look like this, the Zinsco, Federal Pacific Electric, if you see rust, if you see corrosion, if you see melting plastic, just let the homeowner know, hey, you should really get an electrician come in to assess this. And then before you do anything else. So just kind of in summary, if the main panel is a fuse type, if they're hazardous types, if the electrical load, if there's not much electrical load left, and one way you can know this is if the lights flicker when you turn something on, or if there are no blank spaces, the homeowner may need to upgrade their panel or add a sub panel before implementing any measures. And if you are wanting to know, well, can this whole house be electrified? Is it 200 amps or greater? Does the panel have the capacity to support additional current? So that's again, is there the house isn't already pulling that whole 200 amps, and are there solar panels? That's really going to be good to help their gas bill. All right, so that's the end of whole house electrification. I see some questions have probably come in.
Karina, there's been no questions in the chat.
No questions. Okay, well, does anybody have any questions? That was a lot, and there have been changes from last year.
Looks like a comment from Skip Walker saying that Zinsco was purchased by Sylvania and continued into the 80s as well. So you might see some Zinsco panels, looks like even a little bit into the 80s. I think many, the thing to just, reinstate, we're trying to train you all, since we know that you're not electricians necessarily, but I'm sure, however, in our work professionally, that we've seen electrical panels. And so hopefully, if it looks like a modern day electrical panel, great. If it looks like something really old and outdated, we just want your safety to be the top priority, not the electrification checklist. So yeah, if anything looks off or unfamiliar, you can try and collect any data that you're comfortable with, but can definitely feel free to skip this section and then just explain that the panel was old and there were safety concerns. Karina, there's a question that asks, what is the best way to distinguish a sub panel from the main panel?
Yeah. So the sub panel, see, I guess I don't have any photos of that. Typically, it will have very, very big wires coming in the top above the panel. A lot of times these panels are in basements, and maybe I can annotate here. So there'll be a couple of really big lines coming up the top here. And that's from the main service. A subpanel, often you'll find it here, and you might find it labeled within the main panel. This one is labeled service disconnect, so it's pretty obvious. A subpanel, I'm gonna close my writing here. Oh, not very clear. All right. A subpanel typically is a lot smaller. So you can see these ones here. There's only a few breakers, and there's not always even a disconnect. Not always a main breaker in it. Sometimes there's a little box just to the left that might have the disconnect. It's usually one that has a flip up type, and I'll try and find some photos of these to help clarify that. But usually you can just tell by what's in there. You can see that it's not covering the whole home, right? You know that usually the main panel will have things like lighting, but you might see an appliance in the home that you don't see a breaker for. And so it's probably somewhere else. A lot of times these subpanels will be right next to the main panel, so it's pretty easy to tell. The bigger one is usually the main panel. But the subpanels sometimes are also right next to the equipment that they're serving. So if it's a heat pump, sometimes you'll find the subpanel right next to the heat pump, and it might be in a different room. Does that help?
Yeah, I think the main thing, kind of what Skip says, is that the main panel will often be in a basement or outside or in kind of some easy access, because it's where, like Karina said, you'll have big wires that come to it, or it'll be next to the meter. Like Skip said, you should be able to see a pretty direct connection to where the overhead wires are. A subpanel is usually going to be inside the living area, though not always. And yeah, just generally be a lot smaller. So when you're in the house, it'll probably make a lot more sense, but the location is probably going to be your biggest hint.
More questions on the electrical panels?
Doesn't look like it, and we are,
Okay,
we've got about 20 minutes left.
Okay, stove range. This is over to
Me.
Emily.
Yeah, so for this section, we want to know 5 things about the stove and the oven. First, we want to know its cooktop type, and then what type of oven is installed, and then whether or not they're combined or separate appliances. And lastly, we want to know the age of both. Great. So there are usually, or there can be mixed fuel ranges, gas top and electric oven, but that's not very common. So for the gas stove top, you'll usually be able to determine that if there's an open flame. For the electric stoves, there's 2 types, that they could be electric or induction. If there's a coil present, that's usually electric resistance. And then if the stove top is flat, it could either be electric resistance or induction. One way to tell the difference is if you turn the stove top on and the stove remains cold, then that's usually an induction cooktop. And sometimes the induction cooktop usually has a label as well. So for the efficiencies of each cooktop type, gas can be up to 40% efficient, electric coils can reach up to 84%, and flat tops up to 75%, and then induction cooktop can reach up to 90%. And BayREN also offers a $300 rebate for induction cooktops, and it can be a recommendation inputted on homeenergyscorereport.com or HESreport.com. So induction cooktops are, again, very clearly labeled, usually on the glass. And that might be the easiest way to figure out whether or not it's induction or electric resistance. If the heating zone begins to glow red, you usually have a ceramic cooktop. And if nothing's glowing, then usually that's induction cooktop. You can, again, also put your hand over it to see if it's hot or stays cold. And then most residential induction cooktops are generally single phase, and the full range and oven configurations are 220 volt single phase, whereas the portable countertop units are usually 115 volt single phase. And then the next slide. And then you can usually tell if a candidate or if the home is a good candidate for induction cooktop if the stove is electric resistance or gas, if the cooktop is 5 years or older, and also if there's extra space on the electrical panel.
Right, that's it for cooktops. Any questions there? We'll move on. Clothes dryers.
Yeah, clothes dryers. So on the electrification list, we asked the question of what type of the dryers that is currently there. Either they already have an electric heat pump, or it could be a natural gas or electric or a propane gas. We opt for perhaps adding, if there is, or there is no clothes dryer, so we may be adding that to the electrification checklist. I don't know how often people may find or may not find any dryer at all. But otherwise, the next question would be whether the dryer is 5 years or older. And there are rebates, again, being offered through BayREN of $300 to replace an existing dryer. It would have to be an existing gas dryer to qualify for rebate through the BayREN. There's two ways to determine whether a dryer is gas. One would be looking at the information sticker. If you're able to locate it, you will see it may just say natural gas on there or NAT. And there may also be, or there should be a BTU number listed on there. And if you get able to get behind the dryer, you'll notice there is a thinner 3-prong electrical cord attached to a standard wall outlet, as well as a presence of a gas line. And just to note that there's a presence of a large vent hose, and that's just a hose and doesn't determine the fuel type. Next, how to identify if it's an electrical dryer. Again, you'll see an information sticker, and that will show the voltage requirement in amps. And another way would be going behind the dryer, and you'll notice there's a thicker electrical cord, either a 3-prong or a 4-prong, and it would be onto a 240 volt outlet. And again, if you see a vent hose, it's not determining the fuel type. So where to locate the information sticker? It could be found in the back of the exterior, but sometimes you're not able to get behind the dryer. So other places you'll be able to find the sticker would be near the front cabinet side. or on the inside of the cabinet door jamb, or inside of the door itself. So BayREN does offer gas rebates for gas dryers, and knowing what to recommend for a heat pump dryer specifically, you could state to the homeowners that there would be a 250% efficiency for a heat pump dryer, whereas a gas is only at 30% efficient. They would be eligible for rebate if there is, again, an existing gas dryer. If they currently have an electric, then unfortunately there's no rebates available if there's an electric dryer. Now, if a heat pump dryer is recommended, it does require more electricity. And so you want to make sure that there's a space available in the panel, the electrical panel, to make it easier. Otherwise, they would have to do an upgrade. And the heat pump dryer doesn't require outside venting, so that's a good thing about heat pump dryers. So you have more options as far as where you place them inside of a home. So again, a good candidate for a heat pump dryer is if it is a gas dryer and it's older than 5 years, and particularly if there's extra space in an electrical panel, it's more of a reason to recommend it. Any questions regarding heat pump gas dryers or identifying dryers in general? Okay, we can move on to hot water heaters. So in this section, what to collect, information about the existing water heater. If there's a heat pump water heater already exists there, where it's located is very important. If it would be outdoors, if indoors, where exactly it's located, in a basement, a garage, the attic, living space, an interior closet are popular places, or somewhere else in the home. The third question, if it is in a confined space, be it in a closet, or a room that's built specifically for the water heater, we want to get the dimensions of that space. And then, of course, the question there, number 4, where exactly is this located within the home? 5, it asks the question again about whether the space is 6 feet high and 750 cubic feet in volume or more. And you would say yes or no. Number 6, check all that apply regarding a conditioned space. So if it's in a closet, if there's louver or a wall with vents that goes out for venting, or it's a mechanical ventilation to the unit, and whether it's an adjacent to exterior wall. And lastly, the question we ask, is there an electrical outlet within 3 feet of the water heater? So how to determine the gas water heater? There is a couple of units here in the photos. Looking at the one on the left, this is your typical storage water heater. There's a presence of a flue, number 1, and a gas line as well, number 2. And then there's also a gas control valve with a thermostat and a pilot light at the bottom there, number 3. And if you're looking at the photo on the right, which is a tankless water heater, there'll be an electrical cord, regardless of the fuel type. But again, you see the flue at the top there, number 1 and the connection, and then you can see there's the electrical cord connected there. So determining whether it's an electric water heater, as you can see there, the photo on the left, you'll see there's a hard wired electrical supply cord at the top. And typically, as you can see on the right there, it's a metal or gray looking. And number 2 would be there is a no control valve pilot at the bottom, unlike the other photo you saw. There is no gas line connected, and there's no flue at the top. And the photo on the right, again, being a tankless water heater. However, in this case, there is no gas line, but you see there it's connected. So that would represent an electric water heater. So identifying the location and whether there's ventilation is important when you're gathering your information. Where it's located, here's perfect examples of water heaters existing in a closet, and you're going to want to, again, get the dimensions, whether or not when you recommend for a heat pump water heater, whether or not it'll be able to fit into that existing closet. Otherwise, it would have to be, you won't be able to install it there. So you're going to want to be sure that there's proper ventilation. As you can see, there's these louvers, and there's these venting that's existing there, and that it vents outside or in the conditioned space. Okay, and then just to recap, the heat pump water heaters, knowing when to recommend it. You want to be sure that the heat pump water heaters can be installed indoors. That's one of the criterias. There are these split units where the condenser could be located outside, but certainly the main portion of the heat pump water heater must be installed indoors. You want to be sure that, again, the proper ventilation is there if it's going to be installed into the closet. And gallon for gallon, the heat pumps are larger than gas water heaters. You want to be also sure that there's the electrical supply within 3 feet. If not, then one will need to be installed 3 feet from the heater. And the electrical panel needs available space for the appliance. So those are things that you want to consider. So a good candidate when you're looking at a home for heat pump recommendations is, again, the water heater is currently inside, the existing one is, either in a garage, a basement, or other separate space from the living area, as well as proper adequate air circulation and ventilation like we just talked about. And a great candidate is, again, if there is the outlet within 3 feet from the tank, the house has an existing tank storage water heater already, and the water heater is not located in the closet or confined area, that you have to consider proper ventilation, and that there's extra space in the electrical panel. So we talked about rebates for the HVAC. Here are rebates posted for the heat pump water heater, rebates and incentives. Again, the BayREN offers $1,000 rebates. And as I mentioned earlier, it has to be, in order to collect the rebate, it has to be replacing a gas heat pump, a gas water heater. If it's already electric, there's no rebate available. And this is an example on the right, where combining the BayREN rebate along with the tech rebate. There are specific criteria if you're installing less than a 55 gallon or over a 55 gallon. Or excuse me, I believe that means if it's replacing, I'm not 100% sure now. There's $3,100 for less than 55 gallons that can be combined of rebates and incentives available versus greater than 55 gallons. There would be a little more.
Katie,
and
I'm going to
then-
move on because this
Mhm.
information's available. We're running out of
Yeah.
time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the last slide just shows the breakdown, and that's it. Thank you.
Great.
Um,
Go ahead, Karina.
There is a hand up, Karina, from Mickey.
yes, Mickey.
Sorry, I'm unmuting. I do think that the rebates are a little bit complicated. You know, we've had some homeowners that said, well, no, I should be getting say a $3,100 rebate. And part of the rebate is actually allocated or sent to the contractor. And then there's like a little bit of tension there that I don't know how to explain that, but I'm just hoping at some point in time we have a little, I don't know, messaging or clarification.
Yeah, we can work
That's
on
it.
something, or I can see if Home Plus has something. So it is confusing. Again, this is a new program not run by BayREN, and so we're trying to just integrate with it the best that we can. The BayREN rebates are available direct to the homeowner. The tech rebates are a midstream incentive, meaning that they go to the contractor. However, they are legally obligated to pass that savings on to the customer. So if they are getting $2,100 from tech, they have to reduce their quote by $2,100. So the homeowner still benefits, even though they're not getting the check itself. And so we can I can see if the BayREN Home Plus team, since, you know, we promote those rebates and we want to make the homeowner known that they're available. Most of that is definitely happening with our other programs. So I'd like to see first if they have anything so that we can be consistent. But we just want to give you all an FYI that these new rebates are available, and they're definitely, you know, anecdotally have heard that our contractors are just getting even busier than usual. So they're very popular. But thanks, Mickey, for pointing that out, because it is an important distinction in the programs.
Are we able to continue past the hour, Emily, and continue recording?
Yeah,
because
so-
it is recorded. People can revisit if they have to go.
Correct. So we'll keep recording. Hopefully some of you all can stay on since we are wrapping up soon. But if you have to go, we'll get this uploaded to BayREN's YouTube page and we'll send that link out.
Thank you. Okay, back to you, Emily Teeves.
Great. So we also want to look into other electrification technologies that the home has, specifically level 2 EV chargers, as well as battery electric systems. We want to know whether or not each home has either or both of these. And the most simple way to determine that is to either ask the homeowner or look at its label on the electrical panel. As for EV charger types, again, we're looking specifically for the level 2 EV charger. Level 1 usually plugs into a standard 110, 120 volt electrical outlet and pulls 8 to 16 amps. Level 2 is usually plugged into a 240 volt plug, similar to a dryer, or it can also be hardwired, and it typically pulls 16 to 40 amps. And then for the DC fast charger, these are not found in single family homes, but just to give you a quick image on what they are. Then some examples of orientation. Here you can see the level 2 EV charger installed in the garage. And then this next slide, that's an example of what it would look like if it was installed outside of the garage. And then finally, one installed without a garage. As for battery storage, the breaker will either be direct to the main panel or via a sub panel. Usually if a home has a breaker storage system, the panel will typically be newer. And then the battery system could be configured to spread out a home's load over time, operate to reduce load based on utility signals or time of day usage, and or provide backup power in the event of a utility outage. Do we have any questions? Not seeing anything in the chat. Karina, you might be muted.
All right. So the last part of this checklist is, could this home go all in? Are they a good candidate for full electrification? 3 options: great fit, good fit, or not a good fit. Generally, if you have existing appliances that are oil or gas, if the main panel is at least 200 amps and there's space, then it's a good fit. If the above is true and there's solar PV, it's a great fit because they're going to be offsetting some of their electrical load already with the solar panels. I know that a lot more goes into it, but just to keep it simple. And notice it says, do you think? So if you have other information that puts it either way, then feel free to check the box that you think matches. Lastly, putting this information to HESreport.com. I know a lot of you have already done this, but in the case that you haven't, it's pretty simple. While you're editing the label, click the button to add a new checklist. There are sections to expand, and then hit create checklist to save it. These images are using our existing checklist, but the new one will be available soon. I guess one thing I didn't say at the front is the checklist will be available and will be the only option starting on April 1st. So if you are using the old checklist, that is available to upload from now until the end of this month. As of April 1st, the new checklist, anybody inputting and submitting the information will have to be via the new checklist. And we're at the end. What questions do you have? What feedback do you have?
Hi, John. You can unmute.
Is that me? Yeah, so I know when you have I mentioned in the chat, when you have a heat pump water heater inside, it'll just chill that room. So you have to have, I guess they have ones that'll go outside. I was wondering if the same is true for the dryers, or if they also suck heat out of the room. I guess it would have to. Hear that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't heard of them needing as much ventilation, and even that's one of the benefits, is that unlike a gas or electric dryer that doesn't need to vent out the air, they actually don't need a vent at all, just a condensate line. I'm sure they must need to take in some air in order to extract heat and to dry the clothes, but
yeah, so
yeah,
they'd be sucking the heat out and then blowing it back into the room at the same time, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, we can get some clarification on that. Like I said, I've never seen the same kind of ventilation or air circulation type requirements for a heat pump dryer that we see for heat pump water heaters, and maybe it is just about the quantity of air, but we'll follow up.
But also, I'm sorry, I got to the thing late. Do you recommend having the heat pump water heater inside? You have to take that into consideration. Otherwise you create a cold room.
Oh, correct. Yeah, for a heat pump water heater, we don't recommend that they are in conditioned space because they do blow cold air in, unless, of course, they're in a place where you'd like cold air, which happens sometimes, like a garage, but not all the time.
Yeah. All right. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Skip, for clarifying. Yeah, so in the case of a dryer, most of the cold goes into the water, which goes down the drain. So it sounds like it is just a different process since for the heat pump water heaters, the heat goes into the water. The cold comes out as air. So same technology working in a slightly different way.
Great. That makes a lot of sense.
And I just want to clarify, since Alfredo made, I think, a good comment, you know, I would love to give you all of the funding that I could to cover the entire price of the home energy scores. Our funding is finite, unfortunately, and given that we have been able to find a way to keep the program going, even at the current, double the volume of scores that we're seeing, I don't see at the moment that we will have the capacity to increase the rebate amount. It's actually one of the reasons why we had to decrease the home energy score checklist amount, is so that we could just make sure that we can keep giving you all rebates instead of limiting the number of scores that you can do overall. We were hoping that this checklist, the changes would be mostly modifications or clarifications, and not necessarily adding a significant amount of time to the checklist. This might seem like a lot since we are going through everything in this webinar, new and old. But if you are going through this, or when you get a chance to take a look at the checklist when you're using it in the field, if you do think that it's taking significantly more time than the old checklist did, please let us know that, because that is not our intention. Hopefully, at most, we're adding maybe 5 or 10 minutes, which I know your time is valuable, but we're hoping that it's a minimum amount of additional time. But we're always open to the fact that we could be wrong and more changes need to be made. So just continue to give us feedback on that.
Right, and it also, it looks long, but in a lot of cases, you'll check one box and then the rest of that section does not apply. So I expect some homes, yes, all of it applies, but a lot of homes, it doesn't necessarily. And we're not expecting you to answer every single field in those cases.
Hello, it's me again.
Sure, go ahead,
Sorry,
John.
I don't know how to type in on this iPhone, so I'm having to do this right. Anyway, so do you have an idea of what kind of investment? I don't know if you probably, I'm sure it varies, but what kind of investment people have to commit to just qualify for these rebates? You know, like for installing a, it's going to cost them $4,000 rather than $5,000 to get $1,000 for the water heater or something like that.
Yeah, the good news is that the new tech rebates are bringing up the cost competitiveness between a heat pump water heater and an on-demand gas water heater to pretty neutral. Obviously, a really cheap off-the-shelf tank water heater where you don't need to make any infrastructural upgrades it'd be very hard to compete with that. But we're getting closer. So it is one of those things where the homeowner, to a certain extent at this point, other decisions come into play besides just the installation cost. But we want to let these people know that this stuff is available and that it's becoming more and more within reach. However, of course, these are all, you're the expert coming in and making recommendations. And so we are not mandating that if you fill out the checklist, you have to make an electrification recommendation. We're just hoping that, and what we've seen from first year and change of this is that it is making a difference in the recommendations overall that are being made to homeowners.
Yeah. Well, I guess you just everybody's got to know that they're going to have to come into it with, you're going to expect to have to pay something and then document it. But thank you.
And I did get clarification on the tech rebates for heat pump HVAC. And unfortunately, it is very confusing. So I'll try my best to explain it in a simple way. So there are two statewide, what Nancy mentioned, and where you can look at, there's a simple handout that I'll put in the chat. There's two levels of the tech program. One is the baseline and one is the enhanced. And so for the Bay Area, we are already in the enhanced section, which gives more rebates overall, including lots of bonus rebates. However, for HVAC, we are only in the baseline tier right now. There are contracts underway currently that would get us into that enhanced where there's more rebates available. So right now, while we are still in this baseline rebate section, the BayREN rebate can stack if a home is eligible on top of the $3,000 for a heat pump for a total of $4,000. Once we move into that enhanced tier, however, they won't stack anymore because the rebate available for a BayREN eligible heat pump HVAC will be $4,800. So it will be more. So again, it's very, it's a new program that we didn't create and we're trying our best to work with it. But that is why there's a bit of confusion on whether or not they stack. So hopefully that clears things up a little bit, but I guess for you all, since this just factors into your recommendations and conversations with the homeowner, just know that there are lots of rebates available and they can talk to a Home Plus contractor or an energy advisor to find out exactly how much they qualify for. So we're not expecting all of you to be able to necessarily go up to a homeowner and say you qualify for this exact amount of rebates. And a question came in about whether a home energy score is required to submit for rebates. Only for the home energy score rebate itself or the electrification rebate. All these other rebates we were talking about, they don't need a home energy score first. They would have to go through either a qualifying Home Plus contractor or a qualifying tech contractor. And I guess thank you all for who have stayed on still. Again, this recording will be uploaded and shared. And are there any other questions before we sign off and let folks get to their next jobs or to lunch? All right, it looks like just one more clarification on the tech rebates. So the home energy score is not required for any rebates for actual upgrades. The home energy score is required to receive the home energy score rebate and the electrification checklist rebate.
Thank you everyone for joining, and we're available. You have our contact information if you have any questions or feedback as you implement this new checklist. We're glad that you joined today.